Okay. Well, welcome to BioGenerator. I'm Jim McCarter, Senior Managing Director. BioGenerator Ventures creates, builds, and invests in companies that are solving important challenges in human health and agriculture. We are the startup arm of BioSTL, a nonprofit that for 25 years has laid the foundation for the growing innovation economy in St. Louis. BioGenerator has invested over $50 million to help start 140 St. Louis biotech companies. Our companies have gone on to raise nearly $3 billion in follow-on funding and created thousands of jobs.
Thank you for that, by the way.
You're welcome. I think you're the first guest to thank us for that in real time. But we've also supported over 200 companies with office and lab space in the BioGenerator labs in Cortex and the Helix Center in 39 North. So we're glad that you've braved the cold and the snowdrifts for the first Innovators Hour of 2026. And we hope you'll join us again in February for John Silva and Jennifer Avari Silva from Centiar and WashU, in March for Joy Jiang and Graham Koltitz from Prognosia and WashU. And in April, we'll move locations to the 39 North Ag Tech Innovation District to hear from Susan Martino-Cat of Solus AgriSciences and Martha Schlicker of Impetus Ag. So search Innovators Hour at BioGenerator for our website and more information, including videos of prior conversations. As nonprofits, BioSTL and BioGenerator are incredibly grateful to those of you who've supported us over the years, and we hope you'll consider making a contribution so that we can continue to bring you programs like Innovators Hour. So just scan one of the QR codes on the table for a link to the donations page or search for it on the BioSTL website. So for today's Innovators Hour at BioGenerator, I'm excited to welcome two of SweetSpot's co-founders, CEO Stephen von Rump and Chief Product Officer Dr. Amiad Fredman. So SweetSpot solves the problem faced by endocrinologists of how to interpret and act on data from biowearables to best care for patients. Now, Stephen and Amiad, you both began this project at BioGenerator, Stephen as an entrepreneur in residence and Amiad as a venture fellow. But perhaps you can each begin by telling us a bit about your training and your careers prior to coming to BioGenerator in 2020.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm an engineer by training. Back in my day, there was no such thing as a biomedical engineering degree. So I was an electrical engineer, but I took all the biomedical courses I could. And I've always been fascinated with healthcare, medical technology, and I've spent much of my career doing that. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been part of several startups, founded several startups, had a few exits. I've also lived around the world. I did a startup in Sweden where I lived for 6 years. Ran a med tech company in Hanover, Germany for a couple of years, and even spent some time in China with a startup there. So it's, been a big part of my career. When I finished my gig in Hanover, I came to St. Louis in 2019 and did not intend to stay here. But my wife, who's a born and raised California girl, fell in love with St. Louis. And so we decided to stay here. She liked the pace of life. She liked the traffic. Most of all, she liked the cost of living. So that's where we stayed. And I didn't know, I've lived in the Bay Area. I've lived in Boston. I've lived in Austin. All these big, high-tech, startups, hotspots. I had no idea the extent of the ecosystem for entrepreneurship in St. Louis. I was really surprised when I saw it, and so I got excited about that. I became an EIR at BioGenerator, and then just as COVID was hitting, Harriet Rader, who I think most of you knew, and Charlie Bolton, came up with this idea for SweetSpot, which originally was supposed to be a venture studio, not unlike Redesign Health, that obviously morphed over time. But that's how it started, and of course, that's how I met Amiad, although it was 9 months before we really met face to face.
Yeah, and then Amiad, how about you? What did you do before coming here?
Yeah, so I am a trained physician. So I graduated from GW School of Medicine in Washington, D.C. in 2020. And along my medical school journey, I knew I always wanted to do something with my medical degree that combined both my passion for patient care and healing with my passion for technology and just the fact that I am, by definition, a very big nerd. And so
Yes,
I
he
needed
is.
that to be, yes, Stephen knows this well. We just got a tech support firm that we're working with, but until then, that was me. And I didn't know what form that would ultimately take. Along my third and fourth year of medical school, I started doing some work on the side with some different startups in the digital health space. I was very, and still am, very interested in virtual reality solutions and augmented reality solutions in the healthcare space using gaming technology. So I was very interested in those types of solutions. And I got to start working with designers and game developers, and I just fell in love with it. And I also saw that there was a real value in having someone that was medically trained and fluent, working not just in the positions that you hear of in startups of chief medical officer, medical director, things like that, but actually working on the ground in the trenches with the design teams and with the developers. And I really thought that that was important, and I fell in love with product. And so made the decision after medical school that I was not going to continue in the traditional path, did not pursue a residency, and wanted to go right into that entrepreneurial world, kind of right place, right time. BioGenerator was looking for a new venture capital fellow. And, I'm born and raised in St. Louis, and the idea of coming back home, we had our first daughter at the time, and so, grandparents are here, my two brothers are here, so I felt very, very fortunate to return. My wife also pushed to come back to St. Louis, so she's from New Jersey, but she also fell in love with St. Louis. And, the rest kind of is the story, but certainly, very grateful to BioGenerator for the opportunity because it kind of was the launching pad, honestly, of my career in digital health.
Excellent. And so maybe you could take us through that process a little bit in two regards. So before Aegis became focused on SweetSpot, you looked at something like 30 different ideas. You were doing this all virtually remote during the pandemic. And so
Right.
maybe tell us a bit about both doing this remote as well as, how were you vetting or prioritizing or ranking these various opportunities?
Well, we were what BioGenerator called back then, I guess still does today, a so-called team-first concept. In other words, we put the team together and got our initial funding before we even knew what we were going to do. And the reason why that's important in digital health is that digital health is an execution play much more than other areas, medical devices or biotech or pharma. It's more of an execution play, and so you need a team that can not just find the idea but know how to bring it to life.
And maybe go a little deeper because people may not realize quite what you mean by that, but you're saying that you have to bring it all the way to market as opposed to protect the intellectual property and demonstrate that, right? So
medtech, pharma, biotech is all about mostly about the technology, developing the technology, doing the clinical trials, going down the regulatory path, and so on. Those things can be very important in digital health too. Certainly the technology is, but the big difference is in a digital health company like Aegis, like SweetSpot, you have to actually build a company. You got to build a sales and marketing organization, an operations team, product development, all those things. So it's fundamentally different.
Yeah. And were there other ideas that you almost did instead of what became the SweetSpot idea?
Lots and lots.
Yeah, that was a fun, essentially, year where we just were working with different hospital institutions and academic institutions and looking at what technology had been developed and in many cases just sitting on the shelf. Some were more concepts, some actually had small MVPs. We looked at a lot of different types of deals. I remember we looked pretty seriously at a OR scheduling tool to try to reduce kind of wait times in the OR. We looked very seriously at a physical rehab, virtual reality therapy.
Yep.
I remember having the headset mailed to my house and being downstairs in my basement in physical rehab VR. We looked at a similar to SweetSpot, but kind of in the cardiology realm, a really interesting, I still think this is an interesting idea. It was solving the problem that EMTs have in the ambulance, where there isn't a universal platform that helps communicate EKG readings from the ambulance into to the docs in the emergency room. And so more often than not, and this is still true today, you just have the EMT sort of interpreting to the best of their ability the EKG over the phone to the doc. And so the first time that the doc actually sees the EKG is when the patient arrives and they get a fresh one in the emergency room. And that can lead to a lot of false STEMI protocols, which obviously can be very costly to the hospital as well. So that was really interesting. So we really looked at a lot of different things before deciding on SweetSpot and remote monitoring.
That's how we spent most of the first year, 2021.
Yeah, let's come back to that at the end, because as we work on building out the BioSTL redesign health venture studio, love to get your kind of advice on what didn't work in your experience. But so let's go into SweetSpot then, and when Ralph Walknin came in with this opportunity, tell us about how that came about.
So Dr. Ralph Walknin, who is our Chief Medical Officer now, in late 21, I think around that time, late 21, he came to BioGenerator looking for funding for this idea he had for a remote patient management platform, a software platform. And he met with the investment committee, and they said, Dr. Walknin, this sounds like a really interesting idea. We're not sure we totally understand it, but it sounds interesting. You're obviously a smart guy, but we can't fund you. We can't fund you. You have no team. You have no startup experience, and you have what we're pretty sure is a good day job that you're unlikely to leave anytime soon. And they said, but we know a guy. And that's how Ralph and I met.
Yeah, and so let's also you have a fourth co-founder, Abby Cohen, so maybe just real quick, how did Abby get involved? I don't want to leave her out of the story.
Yeah, Abby, and actually Burl Stamp was a co-founder originally. He's here today as well. Some of you also know Kay Brochat. But Abby was part of what was at the time called, was it the G2B, Grant to Business program that Harry Rader ran? I think that's what it was called. And she was one of the proposal risers. She was like Veronica Redmond. And I was doing the same thing as an EIR.
And so that's how the team started, because I was, working on the BioGenerator side of helping to put together this team, which I would then join. But it was about, let's find experienced individuals in the digital health space to go out at the beginning, the idea of this team first umbrella company. But when we found SweetSpot, it really resonated with all of us, I would say, individually, from both a personal standpoint and a professional standpoint. Stephen, you, of course, had experience in virtual care with some of your past successful startups.
Right. Although that worked against us at first.
Yeah, and so maybe to get to that point is, tell us what did Ralph propose, or what problem was he trying to solve?
Sure, yeah. So Ralph, Dr. Walknin, as an endocrinologist, knew and lived this problem every day that he managed over 1,000, 3,000 patients living with diabetes, the vast majority of them who are on some CGM, continuous glucose monitor, or automated insulin delivery device, an insulin pump. These devices are revolutionary, and I remember really the first day of medical school, I remember our dean talking to us saying, you're at a really exciting point of healthcare, because by the time you graduate, the greatest innovation since the pacemaker is going to be realized, and that's going to be the artificial pancreas. It's going to be one of these continuous glucose monitors talking to the insulin pump and essentially becoming an artificial pancreas. Senses the glucose needs and can deliver the insulin to respond. Now, in many ways, we are living in that world. But even in that reality, there are so many different patients on different devices. From a technical standpoint, all of that data lives in different homes across different spaces of the internet. And so getting all of that information to one place and having something that can actually pull in that data, triage it, make sense of it, and spit it back out to the provider, a very busy provider who only maybe has 5 minutes to look at something, to say, this is the person you need to be looking at right now, and to really aggregate all of that and to make it meaningful and actionable. And so that's the concept that Dr. Walkneen had, because he saw that we were not we were not getting the value out of arguably the greatest medical innovation since the pacemaker. And that is something that very quickly resonated with all of us. From a business standpoint too, we all were familiar with the financial and the business model and implications of this type of monitoring as well. That was very popular, especially at that time in 2021 with remote patient monitoring. And so ultimately, once we really sat down with it, it really grabbed us.
Yeah, but then Stephen, you knew a lot about remote patient monitoring. You knew it was a crowded field.
Right.
Tell us about this kind of what your initial thoughts were and then this epiphany you had.
Well, the first thing you have to understand about my background, when I met Ralph, I didn't know how to spell diabetes. I literally did not know what an endocrinologist was. I sure as hell couldn't spell endocrinologist. In fact, with all the autocorrect tools we have now, I'm not sure I'm spelling it right today. But but I did have a remote monitoring background, but my background was in the more standard commodity, what I sometimes call Walgreens devices, blood pressure cuffs, weight scales, pulse oximeters, even the glucometers, the finger stick, glucometers that can report the data to an app, by Bluetooth. And so that worked against me because I made the mistake of assuming that these devices, these CGMs and these pumps and pens were with the same kind of device. Those devices are easy to integrate into a platform, the blood pressure cuffs and so on. Easy to do because they're standard APIs. They're public. You can write the code for a device over a weekend. And there was a lot of RPM companies, even then. There's even more now around. And so my first response to Ralph was, Ralph, that ship sailed a long time ago. RPM, everybody's doing RPM. We have nothing to add, to this. What I didn't understand is that these are fundamentally different devices in terms of complexity, in terms of the volume of data they create, and most importantly, the way the data is managed and frankly protected by the manufacturer from the device all the way up to the cloud. And as I began to understand that, I still remember the day I guess it was probably the end of 21, sitting in one of those conference rooms right up there. Ralph and I were talking, and he kept saying, no, it doesn't work that way. And all of a sudden, it hit me like a lightning bolt. I said, you can't see the data. And he said, hallelujah. So that's how the idea for SweetSpot was born. I knew it was a very difficult technical problem to solve because of the disparity of all the sources of the data. But I also knew that if we could solve it, we'd be doing something really special in the industry.
Excellent. And so, Amiad, maybe we can take a step back and just, I think many people in the audience know, but for anyone who doesn't, just talk a little bit about the importance of diabetes as a disease, the impact it has on the health of people in the United States, not just type 1, but also type 2. And then also kind of pre-CGM, what kind of metrics were being used and how those metrics fall short.
Right. Yeah. So, of course, I think most people are familiar with diabetes. A lot of people can think of someone that they know with diabetes, a family member, a close friend. Of course, two different types of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes, typically onset earlier in life, around childhood, and then type 2 diabetes is adult onset diabetes. There's insulin-dependent diabetes, and certainly for our individuals living with type 1 diabetes who are dependent on insulin as their body is not producing the insulin on its own, and so that's the individuals that we're seeing who are needing to give themselves insulin. That's a manual shot. Historically in the past, type 2 diabetes is more about insulin resistance. At a certain point, may require that insulin to come on board. And I think what is the metric, Stephen? An individual living with diabetes makes like 10 times more, maybe even more medical decisions for themselves every single day.
Correct, because they have to. There's nobody else to do it.
And what's so special about diabetes, and I didn't realize this until starting to talk with endocrinologists and people living with diabetes and diabetes educators, there's something special about diabetes in the field of healthcare that I haven't seen in other specialties. So many individuals working in diabetes have a personal story to share and a reason for getting into that space. They either have diabetes themselves, they have a loved one. It really is quite amazing. And so prior to the CGM, the gold standard for diabetes care in terms of that metric is, it's the finger prick and the hemoglobin A1C. So you go into your doctor every 3 months, you get that hemoglobin A1C. It is essentially a 90-day report card of your sugar, saying how have things been looking, if it's high, then we know we need to be a little bit more aggressive. Now you can get increased fidelity by, keeping a log of your finger sticks, and based on that, changing things on a more smaller term time frame, whatever that is, minute by minute, however you're doing those finger sticks. But that was really it. It was a manual process, and it was a 90-day stretched out period, and it required a lot of behavior and intervention from the patient to stay on top of it, a lot of motivation, which can be very, very challenging. So the innovation of the CGM was that this is something that you can just stick on. They're 2-week sensors, and depending on the device, every 5 minutes, every 1 minute, you're actually able to get that glucose readings. And so now, not only do you you don't only have a 90-day kind of stretch of a reference point, but you have a timeline. You have a daily graph that shows everywhere where you were, what happened right after you had that ice cream sandwich, or, whatever it was. I actually, in some of our testing, wore a Freestyle Libre device for 2 weeks, and I actually really recommend it. They're now over the counter, and you can go and pick one up, and I actually thought I learned a lot about my body. I don't have diabetes, but you could really see, different foods that you are sensitive to and what it feels like to be responding to that physiologically. And so you have that insight. So again, if you're with a motivated patient or someone living with diabetes, they may have that app on their phone, and in any moment they can take it out and say, look what my glucose is right now, look what my body's doing right now. And some patients are really excited about that too, and maybe they'll make some lifestyle, diet changes based on that, and they're very educated about their insulin needs, and that's really great. But the doctor didn't necessarily, they were still looking at the CGM for the most part only every, let's say, 90 days when the patient came in for their visit. So kind of still treating it like hemoglobin A1C. Yeah, you get now a 14-day report of daily graphs instead of a single number, but you're still looking at a historical reference rather than really taking advantage of that continuous cloud-enabled
so
device.
they're not leveraging the real-time data flow.
Exactly.
And then, so tell us about the initial MVP that you built and launched in early 2022, and then what you got right, and then what you realized you were actually solving different problems than you initially thought.
Well, it was very simple. We thought we were a SaaS, software as a service, because the fundamental problem we were addressing was they can't get the data. So, okay, let's solve that problem. So we got the data, we built the dashboard, all the things that Amiad talked about, triaging, making actionable data, problem solved, right? Well, it turns out that was just the beginning, because even though that we had solved the problem of getting the data, you still need a resource to make it actionable. You still need somebody to enroll patients. You still need somebody to do device troubleshooting. You still need a clinical team that can do the reviews and make the treatment recommendations. You need a billing algorithm, because this unlocks reimbursement codes that you can't do if you don't have the data. But now that you have them, you need somebody who understands how to do that, and a billing algorithm that can assign the billable codes. All of those things. So we thought we were a SaaS at first, but turns out we were much more than that.
Right, and that's kind of like what I say. You can have the greatest tool in the entire world, and we think SweetSpot is, but at the end of the day, if the busy doctor or nurse or diabetes educator who already has a full stacked workload doesn't have that time to log in, let alone manage a patient population of 100, 300, 1,000, 3,000 patients who are looking forward to daily monitoring or monthly touch points, it's not worth anything. And so that's when we realized we need to become a service. And so I think that's actually probably, even as the product owner, probably what I am most proud of SweetSpot is the incredible team that we've put together from the clinical side. We really only get the best of the best, and we've been able to stay true to that. And so now when you work with SweetSpot, you get this incredible team of certified diabetes education and care specialists that are coming in to support the practice, work with the practice, and support this program without, increasing any overhead at the practice.
Yeah, so maybe we'll talk about it from the patient's point of view in a second, but just to start from the point of view of your customer, the endocrinologist or the medical practice, why do they decide to buy SweetSpot, and what is their experience like as a customer of the product?
Well, the value propositions are very simple. You're going to take better care of your patients. It's well documented that more frequent touch points, instead of your 3 times a year A1C measurement, these monthly touch points and review of the data leads to better clinical outcomes. You're going to take better care of your patients. You're going to make money doing it because we're unlocking reimbursement codes for you that you couldn't use before. And we're going to take care of everything end to end. We're going to do the patient engagement on the front end. We're going to do the clinical reviews on the back end. We're going to do the billing support. You have to do very little as a practice if we get the workflow right. And that took us a while to figure out, but we finally did. Better care of your patients, make money, and not have to do much for it.
And then so tell us, Amiad, from the patient perspective, what benefit do they get, and how does your clinical team work with them? And then tell us a little bit about the clinical data you have in terms of time and range and other metrics that you see improving.
So what SweetSpot is really good at, and what we've seen to excel at, is really 2 things. We are really good at identifying patients who are struggling. So patients who are starting off in poor glycemic health, and we are really good at and we're really good at moving them out of those zones. And so actually, our
90%.
90% of our patients who start off in the bottom 60% of glycemic health percentile improve significantly to areas of improved glycemic health. So that's what we're also really good at identifying the patients who are doing well and starting off in good areas of glycemic health and keeping them there. And that's also really important. Stephen, you introduced me actually to the term clinical inertia. And what that means is right that middle area right there, that 60 to 80 percentile of glycemic health, that's actually the most challenging patient group to see any change in. They tend to like to stay there. But what we've seen is with SweetSpot, actually, we can get patients out of there and then keep them out of there, because with clinical inertia, there's usually that fallback as well. So that's what we've seen that SweetSpot is really excels at. And then, in terms of the value to the patient, that's pretty much exactly how we explain it to them as well. I think there are 2 kinds of patients. There's a patient who, when we start them in the program, they're doing well and they have good ownership over their devices and their diabetes, and they feel comfortable. They've lived with the disease for quite some time. And we can come in and we can say, we can share that burden with you. We can take some of the pressure off of you so you don't have to feel alone in managing this, because you know that someone is there. I like to use the word guardian angel because that's kind of how it feels, and it's very concierge. You need to talk about healthcare terms, but someone is watching out for them. And then the patient who is not in that position, who really is struggling, these are the patients that we are making sure that we are keeping a very close eye on, that SweetSpot's able to triage. These are the patients that are having significant time in hypoglycemia that could end up in the emergency room, or significant time in hyperglycemia. And these are the ones that we're really able to focus on and get out of that dangerous zone. And so I think what's really cool about SweetSpot is, and I think what attracted both of us, and Abby as well, and Dr. Walkeneen from the beginning, is that the value propositions, they all feed into each other so nicely. The patient senses it, the doctor senses it, we sense it, the clinical value, the workflow, the financial, it all just kind of fits together really, really nicely.
And maybe say a little bit about the consequences of good glycemic control versus poor glycemic control over the course of several decades in terms of the risk of amputation, kidney failure, blindness, heart attack. What are the metrics like if somebody has, a couple decades worth of good control versus poor control?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, there's the acute concerns, right? So these are going to be your patients who are having, sustained very high levels of hyperglycemia, of elevated sugar, and that can send them into DKA, which is a medical emergency, and they would be utilizing the emergency services. On the flip end of that, there's the patients who, again, from an acute standpoint, are experiencing significant lows and could go into, diabetic coma, and again, that's something that is a medical emergency. So there is that aspect of it. And we certainly are playing in that space. But what we're really looking at, because we're in a month-to-month remote monitoring program, is exactly like you said, is those overall trends. And we like to say it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think that's really, really important in diabetes management, especially because it's such a personal disease. It's such a heavy disease that it's just a part of your life. It's in everything that you do. It's in how you exercise. It's in what you eat. It's your medications. It's your timing. It's your cognitive thinking of all of this. And so having those touch points each month to make small corrections over time can lead to really significant improvements at scale. And that's what ultimately kind of gets at, Jim, the complications that you mentioned. These are patients that are developing kidney issues, cardiac issues, amputations. Obviously, this is what uncontrolled diabetes can lead to, and we see it all too often. And that's happening, and the current medical system can contribute to failing those patients, because this is not a disease that just happens every 3, 4, 6 months when you come to your scheduled in-person visit and they let's make this one tweak to your insulin. And I don't mean to sell it short. There are also great diabetes education resources and all of these things, but they're intermittent and they require you to make an appointment, to drive yourself to the doctor. And for some patients, that's just not possible, or that's not enough. So having this, again, guardian angel every month to month, and regularly reaching out, we reach out to an average of 1.6 patients each month. That's I think what we see a real difference in.
And Jim, to talk about it on the financial side, it costs $12,000 a year more to care for a diabetes patient incurs $12,000 a year more in care costs than somebody who doesn't have it. That adds up to a lot of money over a lifetime. We have taken our clinical results, clinical improvement, and through literature translated that to financial savings. And we believe that we are saving, on average, $4,000 a year per patient in care costs.
Excellent. So you have a product that works, and you're now caring for roughly 3,000 patients or thereabouts, and with private endocrinology practices across the country. And you've had 8 quarters in a row of greater than 40% quarter-on-quarter growth.
Average.
Average.
Yep.
And so tell us more about how have you grown the business, and how are you going to further grow the business?
Well, we decided to focus on private endocrinology practices. For anyone who's ever sold anything to the healthcare system knows why. It's hard to sell anything in healthcare, but it's far easier to do it in a private practice than in a large healthcare system. In most cases, both the medical champion and the decision maker are the same person or the same persons, very different in a healthcare system. Also, the diligence that you have to go through. When you sit down with the endocrinologist and you're talking about, okay, what do we have to prove that we're good at? And the endocrinologist says, are you HIPAA compliant? We say yes, check the box. If BJC asks you that question, are you HIPAA compliant? And you say yes, they say, okay, well, here's a 25-page checklist of things that you have to demonstrate that you could do. So it's much harder. So that's what we focused on private practice so far. And it's it's gone well. Obviously, we've grown very quickly, but frankly, we could grow even faster if we had more resource, number one. And number two, if there wasn't so much so much noise out there in the medical world with diabetes. So many of these companies, they come to these practices and they promise the world, what they can do for diabetes care, and they can't deliver on it because they don't have the ability to manage these devices like we do. And I think that holds us back at times too.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe talk a little bit about the kind of current challenges. So maybe talk a little bit about codes and what's happened with United Healthcare announcement last year, what's changed, how that does or doesn't impact you.
Yeah.
But that's one of several challenges that's come up recently.
Yeah, we dodged a bullet on that one, Amiad, huh?
And we were due for that.
And so explain. Either one of you can explain kind of to folks who haven't been deep into this, kind of what happened.
This was the end of our December, so we did end up getting a little holiday present, I guess.
For sure.
But there was an uproar in the remote monitoring community and industry. UHC, obviously a very large player in the commercial and Medicare Advantage insurance space. Sort of stealth updated and released their changes for coverage for remote patient monitoring, and put forward a change that was going to knock out a whole list of chronic illnesses and diseases that they were previously covered for remote patient monitoring, narrowing it down to 2, which was just congestive heart failure and hypertension complications related to pregnancy.
So they removed diabetes, the most expensive chronic condition in the world.
So this was going to be, this was very upsetting for many reasons. It was very upsetting to healthcare providers who had set their patients up and were already receiving this care, some of them for several years. Obviously, it was very upsetting to the patient who would no longer be able to receive that care and depend on that care. And it was very upsetting from the remote monitoring and certainly for SweetSpot. Just talking from a financial standpoint, it was going to be a big blow to our business. About 20% of our patients were UHC. And so it was definitely a concern.
And what was their justification, and why was that justification?
There was none.
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of people a lot smarter than me, have commented on this, and so I can echo some of that wisdom. So it looked like UHC as a organization in general is looking to save on short-term costs at the expense of long-term costs. That's their strategy. When you looked at the studies that were listed as kind of their reasoning to show that remote patient monitoring was not seen to be effective in improving outcomes for patients with diabetes, it doesn't take much to see that really didn't hold up. The study that they looked at was what they called a remote patient monitoring study. There was actually no devices involved. It was a texting service with patients who had diabetes, giving them texting reminders. So it really wasn't even a relevant study. And so that, again, I'm not in the room where it happens, but led to believe maybe didn't hold up under scrutiny. There was also, from a legal standpoint, a question of the legality of this move for the Medicare Advantage populations, because you are required to cover the same codes that CMS, that Medicare covers in a Medicare Advantage plan. UHC, by leaving some coverage for certain conditions, I think was hoping to kind of get by that. But again, not being in the room, but based on the result of an indefinite, at this point, delay to these changes, which was very, very welcome news, certainly.
So that delay came about right before the holidays?
Correct.
Is that kind
Correct.
of the timing of all of that?
And we had faced, as a company, as a startup, a lot of challenges, I would say, in those end of months, and we're good at facing challenges, but it did feel like the hits kept coming, and it was nice to get a break.
So let's talk about 2 other kind of big changes in the landscape. One is AI, and kind of how are you leveraging that to improve your product, and how might that result in competition that is going to try to leverage that to compete with you?
Yeah.
So AI is one, and then second is GLP-1s and Ozempic and all the other drugs in that class, and how is that an important additional aspect to the landscape, particularly for type 2 diabetes?
Yeah, well, certainly GLP-1 is, changing, the course of treatment for a lot of diabetes patients and, making it easier to get under control. But the thing is, even if it's working really well for a particular patient, how do you know it's working well? Well, you know it's well because you're monitoring them and you're doing those touch points. So it doesn't obviate the need for what we do. And as far as AI goes, we want to go deeper into the workflow of our practices to find every possible little tiny inconvenience, pain point, in the workflow and eliminate it. It's what Amiad calls we want to be the invisible ninja, the ninja in the background who just gets it all done and you don't even see him, but you just know that everything works right all the time. And to do that, we have to use a combination of AI tools. We're going to use some agentic AI tools, some audio tools, as well, and then of course some, natural language processing, large language models. And we've identified a number of areas where we can use AI to introduce new features in the product into the practice, into the workflow, to relieve things that they're still having to do manually today. Just one very simple example. When a patient, right now, what some practices do is they have a team of MAs who do nothing but look at the schedule for the next day, look at the patients who are coming in for a visit, go to all these device portals and manually pull down the latest AGP report, ambulatory glucose profile report, and populate it in the EHR. Well, if they're on the SweetSpot platform, we can do that, and we can do that for them in a completely automated way with an agentic AI tool that would just go and grab those reports and pop them in the EHR. So that's one thing, is to make it a better service, a stickier service, something that doesn't hassle the practice in any way. And then also, right now, we're scaling our business with people. With certified diabetes specialists, with patient engagement specialists. And that's okay for now, because what we care about now is top line, growing the business. But eventually we're going to have to figure out how to make money at this, right? And you can't do that if you're scaling with bodies. So we're also looking at AI tools that will begin to automate some of the tasks that they do, and even eventually semi-automating, I'll say, the treatment recommendation, for the diabetes specialist, to give them a starting spot. So we started as a SaaS. It was the clinical, the excellence of the clinical team that got us where we are today, but it's going to be AI that's eventually going to win the game.
And, I like to say, there's always the question, like, is AI going to replace doctors? And radiologists are usually the ones that get picked on first in that conversation, right? So, and the answer is, and I very much believe in this, no, AI is not going to replace doctors, but doctors who use AI will replace doctors that don't. And so I think that's very, very true for SweetSpot and probably many startups in general. And I agree, Stephen, I believe that where we're going to see AI's biggest impact in healthcare is in the back office support. One of the reasons I got into digital health in the first place is, as a nerd, self-proclaimed nerd, it frustrated me so much how technology was utilized in the healthcare system. And technology is supposed to make your life easier, not harder. But in the healthcare, so much with anytime you're interfacing with a healthcare-based software, it's associated with an eye roll and the phrase, not another click, right? That gets turned around. And for SweetSpot, in terms of our design, we always talk about not another click and making sure, because even one additional click, and we've seen it, is enough to drive a provider totally up the wall and even away. And I think that AI has the potential to course correct for how technology is being used in healthcare, and to start getting rid of those pain points, not another click, that accompanying eye roll. Because what it can do, if technology has maybe taken the doctor away from the patient today, right? We all know what it's like to go to our doctor's office and just see them typing into a computer and not really looking at us. I'm hopeful that AI can help bring that back. And so scribing tools, automatic dictation, things like that, charting, the back office support, like you mentioned, agentic AI there. But it all comes back to, no, it's not going to replace the diabetes educator or the endocrinologist or the company, but the companies and the individuals that use it will replace the ones that
It's
don't.
going to make them better.
And it'll make them better, yeah, and give more time to the patient.
Yeah, and so the ability to leverage AI and those tools is one of the reasons that BioGenerator is placing a bigger bet now on digital health over the next 5 years, working with Redesign Health out of New York, working with our BioSTL global colleagues who have strong connections into the medical system in St. Louis. We're starting this BioSTL Redesign Health venture studio with the idea of building 5 to 7 digital health companies over the next 5 years. So question, what advice do you have for us as we undertake this endeavor?
Well, it's, I think the most important thing to remember, as we've already talked about, in digital health, it's a different animal, because you have to not only understand the technology, but you also have to understand with that specific market, that specific customer population, that specific application, exactly how you're going to build a company around that and execute. So you need not just subject matter experts in the venture studio who understand the technology, understand the medical devices, whatever it is, but you also need operators. You need people who understand how to build a company. And
You made the comment the other day when we were talking about this, about doing this in 2020, just underestimating the amount of resources you would need. In terms of, you thought you could build a couple of companies, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and to do what I just described takes a lot more money, because in things like pharma, biotech, and so on, the big money doesn't come until later when you start your clinical trials and doing your regulatory path and all that. But here you got to spend more money up front to build that company, and we didn't understand that in 2020 and 2021, and so we were. We thought we were a venture studio, but we quickly found out that we didn't have nearly the funding that we could ever hope to get, to do multiple deals. So we ended up focusing on SweetSpot, and today, at least for now, Aegis Digital Health and SweetSpot are pretty much synonymous.
Right.
And I would say, just kind of bringing it back full circle. And yes, we started as this team first, and that wasn't exactly what we ended up being. But in essence, and that would be my advice, is people. Yeah, I mean, that's where we started. And I think, Stephen, both you and I and Abby would look at our team, and that's what we're most proud of. Get the right people with the right experience and the right passion. We have such a passionate group, and I think that ultimately, I really believe that's what's going to make us successful, because when we get in a room, there's no selling, there's no, it's like we have lived experience in this, and we really, really believe in it. So, put a little plug for maybe the non-clinical MDs that are looking for different opportunities. There's real value into that lived experience. When you're working with healthcare, Burl, you used to say, you meet one private practice, you've met one private practice, and that's so true. So being so good at understanding the stakeholders and the decision maker and what drives them and motivates them, and learning that quickly to be able to get in there and work with each one, whether it's a private practice or a healthcare system. So that would be my answer, is people.
Stephen, when we first were getting started, you'd made the comment about how St. Louis surprised you, and how, the entrepreneurial community here. Mm-hmm. And you've benefited from BioGenerator as an entrepreneur in residence and as a venture fellow, and being in this space and getting the investment.
And that's just the beginning.
But maybe happy to hear more kudos for BioGenerator. But I'd love for you guys to talk about kind of all the other resources that have happened in St. Louis with Arch Grants and Cultivation Capital and other, just all of the resources in which you've benefited from St. Louis.
Well, sure. I mean, we were very fortunate to be Arch Grants founders in 2023, won that award. And then a lot of people don't even know this other thing exists because it's so rare, but there is a Growth Grant Award that to even apply for it, you have to be an Arch Grants founder. So you're already in a very stiff level of competition, and we were fortunate to win a Growth Grant Award just last fall in 2025. So that was great. We have got, BioGenerator has invested in every round of funding that we've had since that time. Again, thank you for that very much. And the Cultivation Capital led our last round, and we're campaigning for a Series A right now, by the way. They've expressed interest. It's not a done deal by any means, but expressed interest in leading that round. And by the way, for the Series A, there will be a collection plate in the kitchen. If you could spare a few dollars towards our $4 to $5 million Series A, we'd greatly appreciate it.
So, what else should I have asked you that I didn't ask you?
I'll tell you from my point of view, I've been doing these things I've been doing startups for a while. I've been in different kinds of healthcare spaces, and this diabetes space is truly different from anything I've ever experienced in my career. It is, I told you, I fell in love with the problem, right, of the data gathering and so on, but I've really totally fallen in love with this space. When you go to these shows, there are people, almost everybody has a personal connection to diabetes, either themselves or somebody they know. I think half of our clinical team falls in that category, and they walk around and you see them walking around with the CGMs on their arms and the pumps, hanging off their belts, and they could easily wear clothing to conceal them if they wanted to, but they don't want to. They want you to see it. Why? Because in that world, a CGM is a badge of honor. A pump is a badge of honor. They wear it proudly, and they're proud to be part of this world, this community that comes together to support each other and help everybody live a healthy life.
Yeah, Jim, you're such a good interviewer. I'm trying to think what.
We're going to give the audience
questions
a chance,
there.
So,
yeah, no, let's
do that. So let's turn to the audience for questions. But first, join me in thanking Stephen and Amiad for being with us today. And Christy, who leads the BioGenerator labs, has the mic and will be finding you. I think there's someone in the back. Maybe we can start there.
Yeah, first I just want to thank you for sharing the insights. I want to take you back to the genesis of SweetSpot, and could you please share how you developed conviction into this product, that someone will be happy to pay for this product? What was the process like? Thank you.
Well, for me, just looking at it from the business perspective, everything aligned. We were solving an important problem. We were really going to help the lives of the patients, that we support, and the practitioners, who treat them. So there was something important about what we were doing. We were solving a problem that others had tried to solve before and failed, including some very big names in the industry. And I think the other thing is that it had a natural business model that just kind of falls in your lap, in that you are unlocking reimbursement codes that the practice can't use today because they don't have, wait for it, the data, and can actually make money for them. So how often do you see a business that says, we're going to take better care of your patients, we're going to make money for you, it's not going to cost you anything, you're going to make money, and we're going to do all the work?
And I would say also, we all aligned very, very early on and quickly that we would tie our success to our customers, to the practices. And so our financial model, we really put our money where our mouth is. And so we don't make any money unless the practice is making money on the codes that SweetSpot is helping to generate. So it's a fee-based service for each of the CPT codes. And that, I think, it's not easy. I think it's definitely easier to go the other way, but...
Just like a straight subscription.
Right. That in our DNA...
We wanted to make sure our skin was in the game.
Yeah, we're motivated for sure.
Great. We've got a question over here. Is that the next one, Christy? Okay.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
Two simple questions, I hope. First one is just how big your team is today, because you were talking about needing to leverage AI. But then, more importantly, how much work do you do on reimbursement codes, either lobbying, campaigning, understanding? Are the reimbursement codes already there, or are you helping to shift that reimbursement discussion?
I'll take the first one, Amiad. The first one's easier. We've got, I guess, about 30 employees in the organization today, and most of them are in a clinical role, either on the front end with the patient engagement, enrollment, and so on, and as well as the ones that do the actual data reviews and treatment recommendation, patient communication.
Right. Wait, I lost your second question.
How much
The
time do you
reimbursement.
The
spend
codes. Oh, okay,
learning
sorry.
about reimbursement codes?
Right, right.
Pretty
Oh,
much most of your life.
yeah, I would like to say much less. No, but the good news is that the industry is very favorable. And so just in this year, in 2026, 2 new codes in remote patient monitoring were put forth. And so that shows that CMS remains excited about this program. They're essentially putting more money into this program. We know that CMS is very, CMS's baby is chronic care management, CCM, which remote patient monitoring is certainly, aware of in its DNA and very much modeled after in terms of the nature of the codes and the purpose for the program. So we feel that there's a lot of strong tailwinds kind of going into 2026. Haven't needed to be, on the picket line or anything like that, kind of driving those decisions. But we will if we have to.
Hi, just excited to see this up here and talked about today. You've solved the problem, you've created a solution to a problem, and you've created a value proposition that's there. And I guess my question is, yes, there's levels of funding that are needed and everything, but as far as growing your customer base, right now your focus is private endocrinologists, private practice endocrinologists. At what point, first off, is it any private practice endocrinologist? If people, is that how you can grow your business tomorrow, is by finding new private practice?
Pretty much.
At what point does it move out of that? Does it move to employer-sponsored?
Yeah.
Or what's the next step after private practice? I'd love to know.
Well, that's very simple. Today, there's only about 1.2 million diabetes. In the whole country, there's 37 million people with diabetes. Only about 1.2 million of them are under endocrinology care. Why? Because there's just not that many endocrinologists. There's only 8,000. And by the way, less than a third of those endocrinologists are in private practice. The rest of them are working for BJC and Mercy and SSM, et cetera. So although we're small enough now that there's still plenty of room in the private practice market, the next move clearly is to start selling to healthcare systems, and that's a very different animal, as we talked about, both from a sales and marketing point of view as well as from an IT compliance point of view.
The nice thing is that SweetSpot is very aligned with value-based care. And so the metrics that we're seeing and the work that we're doing is very aligned with the concept of value-based care and what why people say that's the future of healthcare. And so we are prepared to go in that direction, when that becomes apparent. And then as we go more into health systems, whether that's actually even taking that one step further and partnering with payers in the future, SweetSpot as its own virtual care entity, these are all things that are on the vision board. It's very much aligned with that overall value-based care.
I think Chris had a question here, and we'll do one more after that.
Howdy. Thank you for your time. I've really appreciated your candor in this process. There's a couple of strategies for widening the moat that I've heard over the past couple Innovator Hours.
So strategies for
widening the moat.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes around IP and licensing. In this case, it seems like there's a very attractive business model that someone with a lot of money could come in and take over. How do you guys think about widening the moat? Or if someone comes in, what makes you guys sticky? Because a lot of teams are using AI, a lot of teams are doing this. So what is the thing that kind of makes you guys unique to the customers you serve and the physicians that you work with?
Well, I'll kick it off and hand it over to Amiad. I think for me, the soundbite answer, it's the devil is in the details of the clinical workflow with the practice. And there's a lot of IP in there, obviously, part of our secret sauce. There's still secret sauce in the platform, but others are going to figure out how to do that overall. But it really is about being very, very deep in an understanding of the clinical workflow and building the tools to support it.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think, if we were answering this question 3-5 years ago, we would say, oh, it's our technology. People, you can't, that's our secret sauce. But especially with AI, I think that is less true. We have to be aware of that. There are other companies out there that are able to do now what only, just a couple of years ago, we were the only ones that could do that. But I think we are a different company now. And so I would agree. I think it is that workflow, to be that implementation, to be able to get in and get going and say, hey, don't worry, we got you. We can lead you through this. That's probably what we do best.
Great. And Sami, last question.
So I was just wondering if you had any regulatory hurdles. Did you have to deal with the FDA? Was it registered as a medical device or not? And how you thought about potential liability in case something goes wrong with patients?
Well, the platform itself is a SAMD, software as a medical device, and we went through an extensive process to have that certified. It's enforcement discretion, so we didn't have to go through any formal FDA process, but we went through an extensive and expensive process to do that. And that's extremely important because that is what enables one of the billing codes. You have to be providing a device, and so that is the device. Liability, I mean, we have liability insurance, of course we have to because we're in the medical world. But
Well, it kind of goes back to the workflow part. So in support of, to be into compliance of the codes, but then also just from good medical practice and patient care, we are always in communication with the provider for anything that we're doing, anytime we're making any recommendation, any changes, which also separates SweetSpot a little bit. There are certain employer groups, like programs available from your benefits that connect you with some type of health coach, diabetes educator, whatever it is. Omada Health is one that comes to mind. But one limitation of those types of programs is they don't bring the provider, the managing physician, involved in the process. That's something from the very beginning was really, really important. We are not cutting the provider out of this. They are a part of this. They need to know what's going on with their patient and ultimately driving that. So, even just from a workflow and a compliance standpoint, and then therefore from a liability standpoint, it's all kind of tied to, keep you in the right direction.
Great. Well, thanks again, everybody, for being here, and have a good evening.
thanks for coming.
Thank you.